in your neighborhood. Who you gonna call? Ghostbusters!
There is a serious side to this 1980s classic, bridge building.
Who you gonna call?
Ghostbusters! To connect with people and to have an opportunity to have a conversation and a relationship with them.
I ain't afraid of no ghosts.
And I had never heard someone say there was evidence for Christianity. I just thought it was, if it felt good, that's great for you.
Welcome to What Now, the Post-COVID Church podcast. The purpose, creating not just conversations, but stories geared towards energizing Christians to engage the lost and hurting in your community. Here is your host, Stuart Kellogg, author of The Post-COVID Church.
Sleeping in your bed. Oh, who you gonna call?
Hello and welcome. Today, a chance to meet two men who are changing the world for Christian apologetics. Brian Auten founded the Apologetics 315 project in 2007, starting as a blog and exploding into one of the most successful Christian apologetics podcasts.
Welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast.
He's worked for years with Chad Gross.
Apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
300 episodes of the podcast have garnered more than 500,000 downloads. Today, you'll find out more about these fascinating men and hear some great ideas on how you and your church can more effectively defend the faith. Brian Auten and Chad Gross came from different backgrounds. Brian grew up in the church, but
Belief in God was not really questioned, and then I didn't really think too hard about Christianity until I started to have doubts that arose from, church experiences where I lost trust in leaders. I thought, well, I may not be able to trust, men in authority or people who have, betrayed my trust, but I can trust the reliability of the Bible.
Chad, who also runs the Truth Bomb Apologetics website, came to Christ as an adult.
I was about 24 and a half, somewhere in there. I began having a lot of questions about what life really meant, and was this all there was to life? And so I had a friend who invited me to church, and I went to church, and the pastor preached in a way that he talked about Jesus like he knew him, which I found that intriguing. And also he talked about evidence. And I had never heard someone say there was evidence for Christianity. I just thought it was, if it felt good, that's great for you. So I began looking into the evidence, particularly for the resurrection in the New Testament. At the same time, I found the person of Jesus very compelling, and it seemed to me that his teachings correlated with the reality that I found myself in. And so when I came to Christ at 25, pretty much out of the gate, it became my passion to learn these evidences and then also encourage other believers to learn them, not only to encourage themselves in their own faith, but also so that they could go out and share it with others.
They each were driven to find out more about the faith, not comfortable simply believing. Their friendship started with a mission of defending the faith, cemented by love for a 40-year-old science fiction comedy.
I ain't afraid of no ghosts.
When Chad and I sort of both started out just blogging in apologetics, like 2007, 8, 9, whatever it was, and then we finally phoned up, and said, hey, let's talk on the phone about apologetics, and we had a great talk, but then for somehow we discovered that we both knew all the quotes from Ghostbusters, so this became just a running joke, and you could apply it to pretty much anything if you're creative enough. For me, I mean, I'm not trying to make a point here about apologetics about Ghostbusters, other than the fact that for our friendship, that is a strand that keeps running and winding around, and it can't be separated from that friendship.
In fact, you cannot listen to their podcast without at least one Ghostbuster reference.
You need to leave us a message, and remember, if you include a Ghostbusters quote in your question, We guarantee that we'll read it on the podcast, and we also ensure up to 50% better quality answers.
There is a serious side to this 1980s classic, bridge building. We'll get to that a little later. I spoke to Brian and Chad recently via Zoom. Brian in Northern Ireland, where he works in the import and export business and heads the Reasonable Faith Belfast chapter, a group looking at the most pressing issues of the day through the Christian perspective. Chad in Maryland, where he teaches elementary school. First, let's define apologetics.
One that sticks with me, if I had to give my own, I would copy it. It's the art and science of Christian persuasion.
Brian Auten.
Christian apologetics, what is that? There's an art to it. There's a science to it. There's persuasion involved in it because there's reasons that might be arguments, there might be experiences, there might be all manner of things, testimony. But if I'm just talking to someone, I'll just say, well, I have to have good reasons to believe something, and Christian apologetics is giving good reasons for the faith.
Yeah, I think that I would define it in a very similar way, just kind of shorten to the point. I would say that it's both offering reasons to believe Christianity, and it's also defending Christianity against attacks against core doctrines.
I wanted to throw out a couple of statistics and just get your reaction to them. Speaking of George Barna, the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University.
Sure.
I do a teaching program called Knowing What You Believe on apologetics, and a couple weeks ago was talking and used this one. So these are Christians who believe the Bible is totally accurate in all its principles. All right. So that's the subset. 1 out of 3 believe the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and the Bible all teach the same truth simultaneously. How does that even happen? Dad, I'll start with you.
All right. Well, I imagine it's multiple factors, and just, prima facie, as I hear those statistics, it just seems to me that I have known many Christians who have claimed that if you would ask them that question that you just phrased there, do you believe that the Bible is true and all of its principles? They say, sure, of course I do. But my suspicion is because we put such a precedent in our culture on inclusion, not being offensive, tolerance, which is misdefined over and over again. But that's a side note. The issue becomes, well, I don't want to say that the Quran is false, or I don't want to say the Book of Mormon is false, because that will make me seem really judgmental. And who am I to say? Whereas even a surface level, and we've done shows on this on the Apologetics 315 podcast, even a surface level reading of the main teachings of these different worldviews show you that they all can't be true because they all contradict. And they contradict drastically.
Yeah, there's just a general lack of engagement intellectually, for one thing. And then the other thing would be, well, we can't call anyone else wrong. We don't want to offend people. So there's that cultural pressure there.
Okay. So why is the church doing such a lousy job of apologetics?
I have seen, even in the short time, like I said, I got saved when I was 25 and I'm 47 now. I will say, to kind of start with a positive, that I have seen an increase in people that are interested in it, much more than when I first got saved. And so I am encouraged by that. Now, I will say that I think there's multiple reasons why the church is doing such a lousy job, but I think that, and Brian's not going to be surprised by my answer here, but I think that the best explanation I've seen is what J.P. Moreland lays out in his book, Loving God with All Your Mind, where he talks about during those great awakenings, we put a lot of emphasis on feeling and experience. And unfortunately, we also had the rise of On the Origin of Species. So we kind of retreated from the intellectual side of the faith and put all of our eggs in the basket of emotions and experience. I also think that we are in a culture where we're not as able to sit and be disciplined enough to read for a long time, write for a long time, study for a long time, because of various factors, social media, entertainment, all of those things, the pace of life. And so I think that apologetics is a discipline, and it does take hard work. And sometimes I think people shy away from doing that, unfortunately.
Is it because the church is too lazy, Brian?
I wouldn't start there. I mean, my impression is that it starts with the leaders, and if there's an emphasis on making converts over making disciples, one is a short-term, quick sort of, I need to get a decision, a tick in the box, versus a disciple. I'm going to make someone, I'm going to multiply a follower of Jesus who is going to run the course of their life seeking to learn and grow and obey Christ and be an imitator of him in everything that they do. That entails entails a learning and growing and having roots that are going down deep. And so if that is sort of the mindset of the leader, where they're manufacturing experiences, trying to cater to people's felt needs, they're not in it for a marathon, they're in it for a sprint and to grow quickly and create structures.
These men have not just studied apologetics and the faith. They've focused on how best to engage with an increasingly antagonistic culture, people who don't have the basic framework of faith. The key, Brian says, is not fearing what you don't know.
I think that one thing that people have a real fear of is not knowing the answer, when really they don't really have to fear not knowing the answer, but they can still engage simply by using questions. And when it comes to the questions, they just have to remember the who, what, why, when, where, how. That it's an easy way to just draw them back up and find out, why do you believe what you believe? Who is it that I'm talking to here? Where are they coming from? What is it that they're really asking? So you just try to remind yourself, what is the question behind the question? What are they getting at? You try to take it apart using questions. If it's unclear to you, one thing the questions do is they give you clarity. And that's essential when you're having a conversation about any topic. As soon as someone says they believe X, you want to say, what do you mean by X? You want some clarity. If they say, well, I'm trans, or if they say, I'm atheist, well, what does that mean in their head? Because everyone's got in their own mind their own little dictionary, and they think that everyone's reading the same dictionary as they are in their heads.
And people aren't used to having questions asked of them.
Yeah, and I like the fact too that it dignifies the person. If somebody says to me, I practice Wicca, for example, that just is an example, and I say to them, wow, that's really interesting. Can you explain to me what you mean by Wicca? Because I've heard different definitions and I don't really know a lot about that. Right away, you're showing interest, and you're not shooting them down. You're not going, oh, that's terrible. But again, you're encouraging them and engaging them and affirming them in the sense of, hey, you're important to me.
We got caught! Ghostbusters!
That gets us back to Ghostbusters and building bridges. Brian Auten.
This idea of the Ghostbusters quotes.
Ghostbusters!
We can find any sort of pop culture thing with someone, and we can find out, oh, this is what they like. They like Beanie Babies, or they like, what, let me pick something even, older reference. This is the thing they like. They like, mountain biking or something. Well, then let that be the point of connection. It doesn't have to have a message, if you will, that we translate to the cross or something.
Particularly with Ghostbusters, I think Ghostbusters is helpful in talking about what is their supernatural realm. Is there a realm that's just beyond the natural? And if there is, what is the best explanation for that? Because obviously in the Ghostbuster films, it's a comedy, and much of it is outlandish, but there are people who do believe. For example, I work with somebody who believes in ghosts and things like that. And so I think it's a great, you can use them as segues to talk about, to go from like, okay, the movie was great. I really enjoyed the film. It's very funny, had this supernatural element. What do you think about the supernatural in real life? And just that can lead you into discussion of, well, have you ever heard God referred to as supernatural?
Especially in these very politicized times and with lots of barriers up, it's nice sometimes you can knock one down with something like that, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's a barrier sometimes in friendships when people try to tell me Ghostbusters isn't the greatest comedy ever made, because then I might just lose.
There is a line that you will not cross.
Exactly.
In addition to Brian and Chad's sharp and inquisitive minds, their relatability and humor provide the Apologetics 315 podcast with leaven that makes the show approachable and easily understandable. It draws in and educates those who are serious about the faith, while at the same time, they're not afraid to entertain a little.
And the Christian worldview.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Their passion is to help strengthen Christians' beliefs and prepare us all to not just share the gospel, but answer tough questions.
I'm pretty persuaded that if anyone wants to do any effective evangelism, if they don't have at least some knowledge of apologetics, they will find themselves flat-footed, both in bolstering my faith when there was a faith crisis, and then also in sharing my faith was where apologetics really came to the fore for me.
Brian and Chad host the Apologetics 315 podcast. There's also a website. Chad has his own website, truthbomb.blogspot.com. I do hope you've learned something, not just about these well-known apologists, but also ideas on how you can be more effective in sharing and defending the faith. If you'd like a copy of my book, The Post-COVID Church, An Action Plan to Thrive, Not Just Survive, you can find the paperback and ebook at Amazon.com. Thank you for listening. I'm Stuart Kellogg.
Thank you for listening to What Now, the Post-COVID Church podcast. Our hope is that some of the ideas you've heard will help your ministry engage the lost and hurting in your community. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform, and it will mean so much if you'd share the podcast.